Back again, guys. Smashing out the content at the moment. I hope everyone's enjoying it. Um, if you aren't, don't tell me. Only kidding. Thanks very much for all the feedback. So this one is a wee suggestion in terms of getting some sort of value picks or players under 20 quid. I've chosen that budget quite deliberately. So 3 years ago when I started, basically I set aside a budget of like 100 quid for my first 5 buys, and that was my sort of target. So signed up, used a referral link, and obviously at that point was buying rares and then got a free card. So that's why I've chosen that general budget. Obviously that budget is going to be aimed at limited cards, but we'll have a wee look at the prices of rares and super rares for that. Hopefully that will give people some pointers or some tips going into the new European season. So I'm going to pick out 10 tips here, guys. We'll pick out somebody for each position. I think actually there'll be two for at least positions. That'll give everybody a wee bit of choice. First tip is Mark Travers at Bournemouth. So obviously 20 quid is quite a tight budget if you're looking at goalkeepers. If you do want somebody who's maybe more of an assured starter, then give me a message and I'll suggest somebody for you. But I think obviously at this point I was just in the mood for something a bit more of a sort of punt in terms of transfers, etc. Mark Travers who's lost his place at Bournemouth, were some heavy links of a move back to the Championship as well. Current price round about £12-13. He's played in the Championship before and done very well there. People are sort of newer to so rare, then a move to the Championship is actually pretty good. So rare cover it, and also they play a lot of games in the Championship. They tend to play over Christmas when you've got people on break like Austria and Russia and other leagues. So if you get a playing goalkeeper in the Championship, that's really good. He is only 24, so he's just timed out the under 23s, but he's a guy who, if you buy him, you can definitely sit on him, and even if he doesn't move to the Championship, I'd imagine at some point he'll be pushing to break back into the Bournemouth team as well. Next goalkeeper, disclaimer-wise, is Fabian Balogh, a guy I own a super rare of, a guy who I owned, or will still have a few limited cards of as well, and held in the past. He's a real interesting one. He has had some injury problems. Former Dutch under-21 goalkeeper. Obviously, last season, although he was fit at different points, Barkas played, so Celtic fans will probably be laughing, thinking, oh, Barkas has kept him out, etc. But the guy is still under 23 until 2024. He's currently trading around about between £8 and £10. Even the rare card is under £200, which is still obviously a lot of money, but this still a guy that I rate. If you sort of zoom back, Utrecht did sell Martin Paes, who actually I thought was a decent goalkeeper as well, and they brought in the Kaiser to give him his chance. They brought in Brandon Horst from NEC, so a lot of people thought he was a bit hard done to in terms of being dropped when Silson came in, but there's no real news that anyone's a guaranteed starter or anything here, so I think that position is open for debate, or is open for someone to win, and I think at some point Fabian will play, or maybe even he'll get a loan somewhere, but I'm hoping that he'll break in somewhere. Next shout is Maxine Barnowa, guy who has just moved from Paris FC to Dynamo Zagreb. In terms of the Super Cup, he started on the bench, but obviously at the moment Zagreb still have guys like Livakovic who have stayed, and also guys like Josip Satalo are still there. One thing to point out with this guy is his scores were absolutely brilliant in League 2 in France. So you can see here, obviously, over his sort of last year, our last 40, that he's really capable. Quite a few scores in the 80s, 90s, and hundreds. A really nice high average as well. He's still under £20 at the moment, so he's averaged around about £17, but he is only 25 as well. At Zagreb, they do have other options in there, so guys like Peric. They have guys like Bosco Satalo, who they paid like $4 million, I think, for, but actually he got injured. I think if you're going to look to pick this guy up, then basically it does look quite likely that Joseph Sitalo will move on, and I don't see any reason why in a team like Zagreb, who are quite dominant, he can't maintain those types of scores. Obviously, the rare at the moment is trading around about £200. Again, it might seem like a wee bit more of a sort of punt, but this guy is playing regularly for Zagreb in a team that's that dominant. Then I think that £17 is looking very, very cheap, especially at his age as well. Next shout is foremost Mendy. He's right on the budget of £20, which I still think is actually pretty good. And interestingly, his rare price is quite cheap, £165. He plays for Amiens in France League 2. And again, this is a guy I own. I actually won him, which was pretty fortunate. I just can't believe his price, to be honest. I don't. You see his average here; he's averaging 65, and look at the scoring profile that he's had out here. And he has had a spell with a couple of DNPs, etc. There. I don't know exactly what game week that was, but there was some talk of him moving to Reims, etc. Obviously, if you buy him, then the main risk is with him playing in France League 2, he may well move to a higher league, etc. If he moved to Reims, then I think he would still be able to maintain quite high scoring, albeit it's a league above. Obviously, there could be some bad moves there. I think there was a previous link to West Ham in the January transfer window, and maybe that's why his scores come down a lot. I've had a look about. I can't see anything recent regarding a move, so I think he will move on at some point, but he's under 23 to 2025. So he's a guy who still has a good few years left in terms of under 23 utility as well, and his scores are just excellent. So I think he's definitely a guy you would want to consider picking up, if not just now, maybe at least towards the end of the window once you see what's happening with him. Next shout is Joseph Akuma. Again, it is a bit tricky during the window, etc. just now in terms of moves. And I think that's probably what's holding Joseph's price back. If you look at the price, £9 for a limited and 120 for a rare, that is really, really low. His scoring profile overall is excellent. He's a really solid centre back. I think the main sort of links he's been having, so the links to France, I think it was Reims who were linked. Interestingly, if you look at the guys who play for Reims, guys like I think Agbadou, etc., they do actually score pretty well, and Reims are set up to be quite a defensive team. So obviously the downside, if you choose to take this one on, is if he's going to move, then he likely will be moving to a slightly harder league. But under a tenner, if you look at that scoring profile, and he is only 26 as well, he's quite a young guy in terms of being a defender. So if you're happy to take on that risk that either he stays or he moves and he's able to maintain some of these scores in his new club, then I think he's a really good shout. It's becoming the Dynamo Zagreb show here, I think. Again, somebody I think who offers great value is Stefan Rrustovski. I think there's a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, if you look at his scoring profile, he does often play right back, and at the end of the season, just one thing to watch out for, he was covering centre half as well. So obviously his recent scores are very good. If you look at his overall last 40, he is still touching on 57, which is excellent. Again, a guy I own after he had a spell with some rotation or small injuries, etc. His price had tanked a lot because of a few bad games, and now he's come back to form. He's a really good guy to own, I think, because obviously he's on the older sort of scale of things, being 31, but he's an internationalist for his own country. England absolutely gubbed North Macedonia 7-0, but even if you're holding through points like the Nations League, then North Macedonia tend to have weaker groups in the Nations League, etc. But his overall averages are really good, and obviously coming in at sort of 10 quid on average, or sort of floor around about 12 for a limited and £160 for a rare, I think he's actually pretty good value and plays in a real dominant team where he's able to get forward, and he's definitely a key player for Dynamo Zagreb as well. Moving on to midfield now, and this is a guy, Cueros, who I mentioned in one of the previous videos. I think it was when I was going through lineup selections, etc. A really interesting one because he has just joined Zenit from Corinthians. There's a couple of things ongoing here. Obviously, Wendell, who has been a complete thorn in everyone's side from a SO5 perspective, if you didn't own him, has been the main man, obviously, in midfield for Zenit. So you've got Wilmar Barrios in there, Wendell was playing in there. Interestingly, the Russian Super Cup, or the first sort of game of the season, has just happened. I can't remember if it's actually called the Russian Super Cup, but anyway, Wendell didn't actually join that squad, and the rumour is that he really wants to go to Cueros. The deal has been done with Corinthians, I think, since January, and he's moved in and he played in that game, albeit it wasn't SO5 covered. His scores are pretty rotten, obviously, overall. If you see his averages, you might think, well, why am I picking out a guy like this? He's under 23s until 2024. He's just signed with Zenit. I think that he'll exceed these scores at Zenit. So firstly, you're getting under 23 utility. Secondly, you're coming in at a cheap price at 10 quid for a limited, 128 quid for a rare. And also, I think he'd be a pretty good guy for cap modes as well. If anyone's followed Corinthians recently, they've actually been struggling in Brazilian League. Overall is probably tougher in terms of teams compared to each other rather than Zenit, who tend to bash teams up. So I'd expect those averages to improve significantly, to be honest. Back to Paris FC again. So obviously we were talking earlier about Bernard, and this guy has just come up on my radar as well. Guy who I had on my shortlist, I think years ago, to be honest. Now, the interesting thing from his point of view is he's obviously not an under 23 player, but he's now 25. But if you look at his sort of recent scores that he's been putting up at Paris, and they are really, really good. So you've got a couple of hundreds in here, one sort of low score, and the rest of the scores are 66, 73, 62, 79, 70, 75. So the other interesting part of that is that he's now signed for Paris FC. So I think he was on loan from Reims, and he's obviously broken in there now, and he just signed, and he'll be under contract till 2026. So given his age, given the scores he's putting in, the sort of last 15 of 64, 93% of games played, I think under a tenner is really, really good. So £9.74 for limited, £116 for a rare. Obviously, if you're buying these cards, then he only qualifies for second division tournaments, but also you can play him in caps. So you can play him in cap 240, cap 270, and all the all-star tournaments as well. And I think he's a really good shout in terms of someone who might kick on and maintain those averages. Again, I've picked out someone who's been on the move recently. So Theo Bongonda, who has just signed with Spartak Moscow, contract till 2027. So we're moving on to the forwards here. He was trading around about a tenner. Now he's up to 14, 15 quid for a limited, and he's about 150 for the rare. So I think there's a couple of factors here. Obviously, I'll come back to my own knowledge of him from when he was sort of playing before he moved to Cadiz. Now he's moved to Russia, no more cards will be minted. So if he is smashing it, then obviously there won't be more mints, there won't be any rewards of him, there won't be any cards sold at auction. So in terms of price protection, that's actually pretty good. If you look at his SO5 scores, obviously Cadiz has not been a very good sort of move for him. He's only got a few sort of peak scores and stuff here. Again though, if you zoom back and look at the left hand side of the screen, you can see what he's capable of when he's playing in the Belgium division. So these scores are brilliant, obviously. You get several hundreds in there, 90s, 80s, loads and loads of high green scores. Well done to anyone who's sort of taking a punt on something a bit more scarce, like a super rare, etc. I know Genki has. Josh, well done, Josh. Punt paid off there. I also think he's a great option for the caps. So you look at his last 15 of 46, and if he replicates anywhere near that form that he had in Belgium and Russia, then he's going to be banging them in terms of overall scoring. Russia's back this weekend as well, so you're getting some immediate utility. The only negative would be Russian take a break, and obviously there's a war and everything going on just now, so I guess there is still a small amount of risk with Russia overall, but we've opted to have covered it all the way through. Sorry I don't mint any more cards, but yeah, he's moved there and they're still covering it, and the games are all on for this weekend in terms of proposed coverage. So I just think he's just a smashing price at around about 15 quid for a limited, 150 for a rare. And actually, by the time this video goes out, I might just deposit and go and buy one, to be honest, because I think that's, if there's any available at that price just now, then I think I'll be getting involved at that, to be honest. Last shout in terms of value is Mikhail Kaufman. He is a guy who has had a move recently as well. So again, not really so worried about transfers, etc. here. Unfortunately, as a guy who has taken a step up. So when we look at his SO5 scores and his general scoring, he's on a really good recent run. And this has all been done in Bundesliga 2 with Karlsruhe. So a wee bit unusual to obviously tip a guy who has just taken a step up. But I think there's a couple of good reasons to believe that this guy will be pretty good. Recent friendly started. I know that doesn't always mean that much, but 7 quid for a limited card, or around about 7, the floor's around about 8. The rares are trading around about 100 quid. He's under 23 until 2025, so he's still only 22 just now, so there's a couple of years left. Union Berlin are a real interesting team, I think. I think they've really done very well, and they're quite shrewd in terms of how they buy, etc. So although he's moved up through a division, I think that if you can get somebody for around about 7 quid at that age, I just think it's still a pretty good pickup. And obviously, he's not the type of guy who's relying on SO5 scoring wise, like being in a dominant team and base wise, etc. He's just somebody who would have to sort of score goals, obviously. There are good examples of that more recently. So obviously you look at guys like Duch, who have come up from Bundesliga 2 and they've still scored a lot of goals in the Bundesliga as well. So yeah, obviously he has, I think, price wise, he's probably dipped a bit in connection with him moving to a sort of club in a league above. But Union Berlin, I think, are also in Europe, so you should get some good utility out of him. And I think that he is a good shout at round about 7 quid for a limited. So that's the end of the shouts. I hadn't planned to, but I think I'm just about to go and deposit and buy a Theo Bongonda. Honestly, I don't take that as me absolutely twisting your arm to go and buy one or anything, but I think Theo's really interesting. So they have Quincy Promes, and they've signed Jesus Medina as well, and that just sort of reeks of goals to me, to be honest. And I think he's quite undervalued because people are still looking at those sort of bad averages and everything that Cadiz, however you pronounce it. But I think he's probably the shout of the video. I think there's a few good shouts in there. I think obviously Maxine Barnowa is a good shout as well if Joseph Sotalo goes, and I think he will go at some point. There's too much talk around him going to bigger clubs like Leipzig, and all sorts of Ajax are getting involved now because Timber have left and has left as well. So I think he's definitely a guy who's in for some game time and can maintain a high average. Hope you've enjoyed the tips and the suggestions. If anyone has any questions, obviously put a comment in any of the videos, or you can DM me. You can find me at McBrideAce on Twitter as well. People often do message me if they want some advice on buying, etc. at this stage of the season as well. If you have any suggestions for any other types of content you might want to see, then give me a shout. Otherwise, good luck for the upcoming weekend, game week probably on SO5, and I'll see you all soon.